Hi, and welcome back to Psychology with me, Mr. Snyder, and today we're going to finish our discussion on sensation and perception with the second half of that, perception. Learning targets today, we'll talk about the nature of attention, perceptual constancies, the Gestalt Principles of perception, and talk about how our expectations and previous experiences influence our perception. So remember, the perception is the second half of the process between sensation and perception. Sensation is the physical stimulation of your receptors, and perception is how the sensations are interpreted and organized and given meaning. Now, paying attention is the first step in the process of perception because there's a whole lot going on around you right now, but hopefully you are paying attention to the video and you are forgetting all that stuff, or you are filtering it out. So the powers of attention help in focusing on certain stimuli in the environment and forgetting or ignoring the rest. First of all, in psychology, we know of certain perceptual constancies, or basically objects being constant. We have size, shape, and brightness are three perceptual constancies. Size is that even though the tendency to view, basically objects hold their same size, whether it is, let me use my ID, whether it's this way, this way, this way, you know this object is the same size. You know if I walk down the hallway and I'm 100 feet away from you, I have not gotten smaller. My size remains the same. The shape also remains the same. I guess this is a better example for shape, holding it up like this, that way, the shape is still the same. And brightness constancy means that we perceive brightnesses of an object the same even as light conditions change. So here is an example of shape constancies. I just kind of told you that before, though. We can rotate objects and we still know that they have the same shape, even though they may appear to be different. Now, for the Gestalt principles of perceptions. Gestalt psychology was started way back when, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it basically means that the sum is more than its parts. And so the Gestalt principles focus on human perception and the brain's tendencies to group objects and perceive whole shapes rather than just parts together. So the principles of perception in Gestalt are figure-ground relationships and reversible figures, and then there are lots of principles of grouping that we'll get to. Figure-ground relationships are the tendency to perceive objects or figures as existing against a background. A reversible figure is where the figure and ground can be reversed, and I'll show you a Necker cube here in a second, the three-dimensional cube you draw on your paper. And proximity is one of the groupings, and it means that we perceive objects that are close to one another as being part of the same group. Similarity is things that look similar are part of the same group. Closure is filling in incomplete figures to make them complete. Contiguity is perceived to things that happen close together in time as being related. Here is a reversible figure. You can see the side of the cube always switches on you, and you can't tell which one is in the foreground and which one is in the background. Here's a figure ground illusion. Is it a wine goblet, or is it two faces looking at one another? And the figure and the ground switch every time you look at it. And then here is an example of proximity of dots. We know we can see three groups of dots there because they're close together. We can see five groups of dots in the similarity because we know they're together. We see them as black and red squares. Closure, we can see those as one circle and one square because even though the lines are broken up, we complete them. Contiguity, we are much more likely to see the figure as being made up of two lines, A to B and C to D, rather than see it as made up of A to D and C to B, or A to C and B to D. So we're much more likely to think it's the one on the left and not the middle one or the right one. And then common region, even though there are two groups of a group of stars and a group of circles here, we see three different groups because of the different colored backgrounds. And then this kind of didn't fit in, but I thought it was important. It's called the visual cliff experiment, and it's kind of cues we take from our environment to perceive things. The table has both a shallow and a deep side, and we put the baby on the shallow side, and they look down at the deep side. They don't know that there's glass there preventing them from falling. The squares in the design look smaller to them than the ones on the floor, which forms a visual cue for depth perception. And at about 7 to 9 months, the infant starts to become very reluctant to cross over the deep side, which they gesture to their parent to be picked up, like this one is here in the picture. Factors that influence perception are our perceptual expectancies, because we expect things to be a certain way because of our previous experiences in life. Ambiguous figures is something. It's an experiment that illustrates this, different perceptual sets, and we'll talk about this more in class. Inattentional blindness is very important. And this is something rather new in psychology, but when we're focusing so hard on a stimulus, we are perceptually blind to every other stimuli that is present. Top-down and bottom-up processing also influence our perception. Do we use pre-existing knowledge to organize individual features into a whole, or do we analyze the smaller features in order to build up to a complete perception? And then here is ambiguous figures experiment. You can see the child on the right looks rather large, and the adult on the left looks rather small because of the window and the clock and the border on the wall, and because we perceive the room as a rectangle, but it is actually a trapezoid with angled walls and floor. And they have one of these around here. They may have one in Fort Wayne at Science Central, but it is very, very cool to go into one. It's hard to keep your balance even. Here's a perceptual set. Interpret the drawing. What do you see? Do you see a young lady or an old woman? Here's how you can see the young woman and the old lady. Would you have interpreted the first drawing differently if you had viewed these two images first? This is because the tendency to perceive things a certain way is influenced by the previous experiences or expectations. The feather in the young woman's drawing makes her appear to be a young woman, whereas in the old woman's drawing, it's not there. We do perceive the wrinkles to be an old woman and not a veil. And then here's the devil's trident. It seems to be a three-pronged trident, but if you look closely at it, it is not possible. It is an impossible figure. And that's basically all I have for you today about perception. The Gestalt Principles are important. The Perceptual Constancies are important, but just please fill out those learning targets, and we will talk about them back in class later. Bye-bye.